it's a difficult week. A lot of remembrances and a lot of yard sites. And again, and for the Schulman family that are here too, we laid Lee to rest last year. It's hard to believe. Uh, and we talked about it last week, but we laid him to rest right before Veterans Day, and just literally a few days before Veterans Day, 5 days, 4 or 5 days before Veterans Day, we had to lay him to rest, and it was very much on our minds at Veterans Day. And I spoke about Lee at the Veterans Day memorial that we had at Santa Clarita, and the Veterans Plaza. I spoke about him on this day, and it was still very raw. We were still literally in Shiva at that time. So here we are, folks. We're here a year later for that too, and so Chaye Sarah begins with the words that this is the life of Sarah, and we could spend the whole time talking about this one line, because it says Sarah's lifetime, Chaye Sarah, the span of Sarah's life came to 127 years. And Sarah died at Kiryat Arba, now Hebron in the land of Canaan. And Abraham proceeded to mourn for Sarah and to bewail her. So it's very clear that Abraham is it's terrible grief for him. It's terrible grief when a wife dies before her husband. It's always bad when anybody dies, but it's very hard on men. I've seen it many times. It's very hard for them to continue. It's hard for women who are left behind too, but it's almost the natural occurrence, unfortunately, right? That men are oftentimes, they pass before their wives. It's not always like that, but it oftentimes does. And that's what happens in it for Abraham, is the reverse. He loses his wife. He's older than her. He's 10 years older than her. So assumedly here, he's 137 when she dies. And so he's already very advanced in years, to put it mildly. But it was a tragedy. Now, he's also in the interesting situation that he has to find a place for her to be buried, which this portion is primarily about. Or at least not. Let me rephrase that. The first part of the portion, the part that we're going to read, the part that's in the Torah, is about the purchase of that place. But the first line, folks, is the powerful place that, again, you could talk about just this line. When we reflect on somebody's life, when they pass, when they die, we don't focus on their death. How do we know that? Because look at this. Look at this line. Sarah's life. We don't say Sarah died at 127. She lived to 127. And people can get focused on, wow, 127, that's a super long life. Okay. Well, for her husband, who was left behind, it wasn't long enough. Beyond that, however many years it is, look at the powerful phrasing of that, which is, again, to talk about how someone lived and not how they died. It's incumbent on us in Judaism. It's part of our tradition to not focus on how someone died, to focus on how they lived. And again, sometimes they die in a tragic way. Sometimes it's way too early. Again, to think about Kristallnacht or Saugus or all these times when young people were cut down and murdered. Horrible. But at the end of the day, we focus on how someone lived, however many years they get to live. And that is what is so powerful and so important for us to see when we remember somebody, is to not focus on how they died, but how they lived. And so Chaye Sarah reminds us of that. And it's not called the death of Sarah, Mot Sarah, it's called Chaye Sarah. So keep that in mind as we think about Sarah's life, as we think about our lives and the people that we love, that we remember the way they lived and we remember them in life. It's hard to do sometimes, but that's what we do. And we're supposed to do that, because death, it comes in a moment. And even when it's drawn out over time, in 99% of the cases, how much more was spent in life, right? How much more of that person's life was spent living a life, and hopefully a good life. So we're told that Abraham mourns her, that he bewails, he mourns, he cries. I mean, that's what the word bewail means. It says, leave chota, that he cried for her. Bewail is a fancy way of saying he cried for her. It's very powerful too, right? It's not just that he was sad she was gone. It's not just that he was affected and missed her. He cried for her. And so crying for somebody who's passed is also not only okay, but it's something that our ancestor Abraham does and sets in a mode for us that it is appropriate and respectful, and we don't have to be stoic when it comes to our tears, that we can cry, that we're given permission to cry. And if Abraham cries, then all of us can cry. None of us are expected to be as righteous and as memorable as Abraham, so we can cry. Now, it says at a certain point, though, he rose from beside his dead. And it says he spoke to the Hittites, the local people of the land, right? The Canaanites are Hittites. It's the same thing. They're Canaanites, or sometimes called Hittites. He says to them, I am a resident alien among you. Sell me a burial site among you that I may remove my dead for burial. Which, again, is kind of the literal translation of it, but I'd like to bury the people who die in my family. And the Hittites replied to Abraham, saying to him, hear us, my Lord, you are the elect of God among us. Bury your dead in the choicest of our burial places. None of us will withhold his burial place from you for burying your dead. And so the Hittites, the Canaanites, recognize that Abraham is a special person. They respect him. We already learned that he fought for them against the kings of the East, that he already seems to be progressing and becoming wealthy, and he's doing very well. What they don't know, or what they don't seem to know, is that technically God has promised them all of their land. That Abraham, this guy, is asking for permission to bury his family in a place that God's already told him, this is all your land. But Abraham doesn't say that to them. Abraham doesn't say, hey, God told me that I get everything. What's interesting is that they actually say to him, you are the elect of God. You are, it says, Nasi Elohim. You're the chosen, the president is the word Nasi in Hebrew, modern Hebrew. You are the person chosen by God. But either Abraham hasn't communicated to him, which would be smart, or again, God, they don't know, even though they seem to respect God, they don't know that Abraham can bury his dead wherever he wants to because he owns it. He just doesn't control it yet. So Abraham does something very powerful here. He purchases part of the land that he was promised to have, but he buys it. And that's what we read now in these following verses. Abraham's purchase of the land that he already owns. And there's a lot of commentary about this, a lot of commentary about why does Abraham have to do this? And so our sages kind of come to the conclusion that he had to, because in that moment, that's what he had to do. And to show that just because we're told we can have something doesn't mean that that doesn't quite work the way that we just go, hey, God told me I can have it. It doesn't work like that. We have to do stuff with God. And that'll be in the remarks that I share from Rabbi Sachs at the end. Anyways, so thereupon Abraham bowed low to the people of the land, the Hittites, and he said to them, if your wish that I remove my dead for burial, you must agree to intercede with me with Ephron, the son of Zohar. Let him sell me the cave of Machpelah that he owns, which is at the edge of his land. Let him sell it to me at the full price. for a burial site in your midst. So he says to them, I have a place I'd like to have. It's owned by Ephron, and it's the cave of Machpelah. It is a cave for burial called Machpelah. That's all we know about it, but he owns it. So he says to the other Hittites, you got to talk to this guy and have him sell it to me. So he tells them what he wants. Now it says that Ephron was present among the Hittites. So Ephron, the Hittite, answered Abraham in the hearing of the Hittites, all who enter the gate of his town, saying, no, my Lord, hear me. I give you the field, and I give you the cave that is in it. I give it to you in the presence of my enemy, presence of my people. Sorry. You bury your dead. I added that. Anyways, he says, take it for free. I'm not going to ask anything from you. I give it to you. Okay. This is the way, it seems like the greatest thing. I get a place to bury my dead, and I don't even have to pay for it. Now, here's a really interesting thing. Abraham is not going to take it. Abraham bowed low before the people of the land and spoke to Ephron in the hearing of the people of the land, saying, if only you would hear me out. Let me pay the price of the land, accept it from me, that I may bury my dead there. And Ephron replied to Abraham, saying, again, he's already told him he could have it for free. But now he says to him, my Lord, do hear me, a piece of land worth 400 shekels of silver. What is that between you and me? Go and bury your dead. So he actually, of course, has now told him the price or the value that he has of that land. Now, what's interesting about this is that we don't know exactly the exchange rates and the inflation rates of Canaan 3,800 years ago, 3,800 years ago, roughly. But that's a lot of money in those days. And so he's struck a price that's probably exorbitant by our standards today. Now, of course, he said, you don't have to pay me anything, but it's worth 400 shekels. So he's established what his value is. Now, Abraham at this point can say, well, you already said I can have it for free. We can negotiate on the price. But of course, Abraham doesn't do that. Abraham accepted Ephron's terms. Abraham paid out to Ephron the money that he had named in the hearing of the Hittites, 400 shekels of silver at the going merchant's rate. So he gave him all of it. He didn't negotiate with him. He didn't say, well, you said I don't have to pay you, but here's 300. He didn't do that. He said, here's the 400. And he does it in front of everybody. That's the important part too. He does it in front of everybody. And so this is a binding contract in front of witnesses. And of course, what it does is it establishes this place, the cave of Machpelah in modern day city of Hebron, as the place of the burial of our patriarchs and matriarchs. And it's a place that's been holy for us for almost 4,000 years. And this area was our first piece of territory in the land of Canaan that is ours, even before Jerusalem, even before any other modern city of Israel, obviously centuries before Tel Aviv and Haifa and all those other beautiful cities on the coast. Before any of the other cities of Israel, this place, Hebron, the burial place of our ancestors, is the first place that we own. The first place that we can hold up a deed and say, this is ours. This is our place. And it was a burial place. And folks, the very first thing that Jewish people would do when they came to any city in any part of the world ever was buy a place, a piece of land for our burial. It was the first thing we did before we did anything. Before we usually even built homes, we'd find a place where we could bury our dead. It was the one thing that we said when we came to a place, we must have a burial place for our dead. And so whether it was, you can name any city in America or any city in Europe, we found Jewish cemeteries in all these places. and and there are little Jewish cemeteries all across America, all across California. You can go up to Gold Country and find some tiny little Jewish cemeteries out by. There's one in Jackson, out by Sacramento, the Gold Country.
You find them in China?
You can find them in China. There's one in Harbin, out in the borderlands just below Siberia, in the place that the Jews came to build the railroads. The old Jewish cemeteries we've found too in Kaifeng, but we haven't been able to excavate them. But the one in Harbin is from the late 19th, early 20th century, from 100 years ago. That one is still being maintained in Harbin. And so there are people, I've met people in America who were born in Harbin who are Chinese, or they call themselves Chinese Jews jokingly, but they're Ashkenazi Jews who were born, their families were living in Harbin when they were building the railroad for the Chinese, the Trans-Siberian Railroad that went across Siberia and China. So yeah, even there. And so we went to the Jewish cemetery, and we went to St. Kitts and Nevis. We went to the cemetery, the Jewish cemetery in the Caribbean. From the graves go back 300, 400, almost 400 years. It was right where Alexander Hamilton lived in St. Kitts, where he was born, and he was connected to the Jewish community. He learned in a room right across the street from the cemetery. The building was destroyed by hurricanes, but he studied there with his first teachers were Jews who taught him Hebrew, and that was in St. Kitts. And you can still go to that cemetery. We traveled by boat, by car, by like every mode of transportation you could get to this little tiny part of the island, so you could get to the cemetery and see that Jewish cemetery. But it was really powerful. All of the other stuff for Hamilton is gone, but the graves are still there for the people that were living there when he was there, when he was a kid on St. Kitts. So yeah, it's pretty wild going to Jewish cemeteries. It's something that when I go to a city and have a chance to go to a place where our people are buried, I always say Kaddish, always have a chance to go there and say Kaddish. And again, unfortunately, going to Hebron is possible today, but it's very hard because you have to get special security detail and special buses that can take people through the West Bank and to the area where the cave, the burial place is. It's not a cave anymore. It's a building. You go into the building and you can see the graves, but it's very hard to get to. But there are a lot of other graves and places in Israel of burial that are sites of famous biblical characters or rabbis that are buried in Israel, where people will come to and pay honor and say Kaddish and pray there. So it is a powerful thing to see the cemeteries of the Prague cemetery that we went to a couple years ago. Joyce was with us on that trip. We went to the Prague cemetery and saw a cemetery that goes back 500 years in the Prague ghetto. And the sad thing, folks, of course, is that some of these cemeteries are the last vestige of Jewish life, that there ever was Jewish life in some of these places. And some of those cemeteries have been desecrated, even in these last days. Some of those cemeteries have been desecrated. There aren't any living Jews in these places. They're just tombstones, and people have attacked and desecrated those tombstones. Not in Prague, but in recently in parts of Ukraine, and also, well, it happened in Michigan last week too, by the way. There was a cemetery in Michigan that got vandalized, Jewish cemetery. So it's a sad thing that, that anti-Semitism, even in places where there are no more Jews, that they'll attack cemeteries. Anyways, this is the cemetery, and this is the burial place of our ancestors. And it says right here, the Ephron's land in Machpelah near Mamre, the field with its cave, and all the trees anywhere within the confines of the field passed to Abraham as his possession in the presence of the Hittites and all who entered the gate of his town. And then Abraham buried his wife Sarah in the cave in the field of Machpelah, facing Mamre, near Hebron in the land of Canaan. Thus the field with its cave passed from the Hittites to Abraham as a burial site. That's the chapter. That's the chapter of Sarah's burial. As you can see, most of the chapter is not dealing with Abraham's grief. It deals with the business of getting the cave, getting that burial place, which by itself is an interesting, can write an interesting Devar Torah, which is oftentimes, as much as we grieve, we also have to deal with the business of what happens after the person passes. We have to pick up the pieces, right? And we have to deal with the loss ourselves emotionally and physically and spiritually, to deal with the loss. But there's also business that we have to attend to. We have to get death certificates, and we have to close accounts, and we have to pay cemeteries. And it's something I obviously have had to do a few times in the last couple of years myself, but I've done it with people. I've had to go to cemeteries with people sometimes and help them in those processes. It's not easy. And again, it's part of burial. It's part of death. It's part of loss, is also taking care of the business. And it would be great if you didn't have to, if you didn't have that monetary piece. And even if you pay for everything, and even if it's all, you still have to sign paperwork. It's still, there's this business end of it, which it's so hard to do, because you have to separate yourself from your grief, and you have to, like, I'm signing a contract to bury my whoever, and it's not easy. It's not an easy thing, and sometimes it's really hard. I mean, like I said, sometimes it's all taken care for us, and we don't have to write out a checkbook or get out our credit card and deal with that too. But sometimes, it's more complicated, and sometimes and even when it's easy, it's not easy. So it's interesting that that's in our Torah portion too. You can reflect on the fact that Abraham has a harder time, because he actually has to negotiate. He doesn't have a place. He has to negotiate it. And of course, in Jewish tradition, it's got to be done fast. It's hard. And by the way, folks, it's even harder today, right now, because of COVID, to bury somebody. So there are other precautions and other things that we have to do today that make the process of burial even more complicated and difficult. So let's hope we don't have to deal with it much longer. Now, we're going to shift gears, because chapter 24 jumps into a whole nother scene, which is the rest of the portion. So 23 is about Sarah's death and the purchase of the burial place. 24 on is about a whole different life cycle, whole different part of Abraham and his son Isaac's life. Let's watch and read. Totally different, but maybe also a little connected. So here we begin chapter 24. So Diane just joined us. Diane came for the happy part. We just read about Abraham's burial, and now we go to the good life cycle event. Everybody should balance, have a little, even when they have grief, hopefully they have a little bit of joy. And what's the joy here? Isaac's marriage. I will tell you this, folks, as I read this year, my COVID takeaway from this is something that I have shared before. You may have already heard me say this. I'm going to say it right now. One of the hardest things about this year, for me, not for everybody, almost uniquely for me, I have had no less funerals than I've had in any year before. As a matter of fact, as you'd probably expect, I've had more. Not ridiculously more. I don't want to exaggerate this, and I don't want anybody to say the rabbi said he's done dozens of funerals for people who died of COVID. I've done probably 7 or 8. It's too many. And most of the people, by the way, who I did funerals for had other complicating factors. And I don't want to say that this was, none of these things it was a 40-year-old person who contracted COVID and then they were taken out. It wasn't that. So I'm not saying that, but I have had more funerals because of COVID. It has 100% had an effect and killed people who otherwise wouldn't have died. And I don't care if you're 80, 70, whatever, 90, and you died of COVID, you still maybe went to die then, and it's still a tragedy. So I don't want to hear anybody tell me, well, they were old anyways. I don't care. It's terrible, and no one should ever have had to die of this. But that's not my point. My point is, I haven't had any less funerals this year, but I had a whole lot less bar mitzvahs. I've had a whole lot less baby names, and I've had a whole lot less weddings. Thank God in the last month, I had 3 weddings, and I have another one this Saturday night. But people just said, enough is enough already. We're going to have a wedding. Even if we have 15 people, if we have 10 people, which one of the weddings I had last week was in a backyard around the corner from me right now. I had a wedding where almost where I'm standing now, a mile away. Thankfully, they had a wedding in their parents' backyard. But it's very hard for me to have lots of funerals and not a lot of simchas, a lot of joyous events. It's very hard. And because people ask me, how do you deal with all the funerals? How do you deal with all the losses? And I say, yeah, I go to a lot of funerals, but I also go to a lot of bar mitzvahs. I go to a lot of weddings. I go to a lot of baby names. I go to a lot of life affirming things. Haven't had a whole lot of those this year. So it is really hard. It does have an effect on me. And it is a challenge to get through 3 funerals in a week and not have that bar mitzvah or that wedding to look forward to on the weekend. So it's been hard. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It has not been an easy time for me not to have that balance, because I do get to share in a lot of good things too. And I haven't had a whole lot of those. Those got postponed. Those got canceled for the most part. Those got moved till next year. So that is my COVID reflection that is hopefully I won't have to share next year for Chayei Sarah. God willing, it will be a bad memory. So it says that Abraham was now old, we know that, advanced in years, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in all things. And Abraham said to his senior servant of his household, who had charge of all he owned, put your hand under my thigh, which, by the way, sounds like a kind of a weird thing to do. And I would definitely not encourage anybody to say that to anybody who they employ right now. It's a good way to go right to jail, or if not to jail, to have a huge lawsuit against you, whether they're male or female. That sounds like a bad idea. But in those days, it's the way people made oaths. It was a physical act of literally saying to somebody, I trust you. I trust you. Today we shake hands. Maybe we won't shake hands as much. But
now we touch elbows.
This one I'm not going to do. I can't even imagine doing. But putting your hand under someone's thigh was literally saying, I'm putting my life in your hands. And in this case, very much so. So it is very close to his family jewels, if you will. And he's saying to the guy, I'm entrusting with you my future. I will make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you will not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I dwell. And remember, he just had a negotiation with these people. So it's not like he can't live with them. He seems to be getting along with them okay. He doesn't want to marry. He doesn't want his family to become like them. Because again, we know that they have some real problems, those Canaanites. He says, but go to the land of my birth and get a wife for my son Isaac. And the servant said to him, what if the woman does not consent to follow me to this land? Shall I then take your son back to the land from which you came? So he tells the guy, you get her and bring her back. And what does the servant say? What if she won't come? What if we have to bring him there? It's a fair question. Yeah. Abraham answered, on no account must you take my son back there. Ooh. The God of heaven and earth, who took me from my father's house and from my native land, who promised me on oath, saying, I will assign this land to your offspring, he will send his angel before you, and you will get a wife for my son there. And if the woman does not consent to follow you, you shall then be clear of this oath to me. But do not take my son back there. So he says to him, I don't care if you don't come back with a woman. The most important thing, Isaac doesn't leave. Now, it seems so strange because if the goal is to get him married, wouldn't you just say, get him married? I don't care if you have to take him there. No. And it's interesting because later on we read that, of course, Jacob goes back to that same house where his grandfather, Bethuel, Rebekah's father, his mother's father, Bethuel, lives, where Laban, Bethuel's son, also known as Rebekah's brother, lives. He doesn't want Isaac to go there. And it's almost as if he knows that if Isaac goes there, something bad will happen. And something bad did happen to Jacob. Jacob ended up spending 20 years of his life there and barely got out with his own life because Laban chases after him. So Abraham knows that even though this is family, it doesn't mean it's easy. And it doesn't mean that we're excited about the possibilities. And there seems to be this real worry that if Isaac leaves, he won't come back. So this is part of the story. He says, I don't care. If you don't come back, you're off the hook. You don't have to do anything. You're done. You're out of the thing. But don't take him. And they're also maybe in the back of our minds, we're thinking to ourselves, maybe Abraham doesn't trust this guy with Isaac's life, which seems an interesting idea and one that we can just throw out the possibilities here. What if Isaac doesn't come back because he dies on the way? Now you're saying to yourself, well, that's pretty weird. Well, in those days, bandits and tragedies and things happen to people all the time when they were on the road. It wasn't a safe place. And what if we don't know his name is Eliezer here, but in other places he's called Eliezer. What if Abraham's worried that if Isaac goes with him and dies, this servant then inherits everything. He becomes the guy in charge. So it's probably a good idea not to entrust the life of my son with a guy who can stab him in the back. Whatever it is, any of those possibilities are not good possibilities. Mm-hmm. It tells us that Abraham, even though he's blessed by God, even though he says an angel is going to help you, even though Abraham is feeling blessed and everything else, he's not without fear. There is still some danger in Abraham's life that he's worried about. It's very clear he's worried about it. So the servant put his hand under the thigh of his master Abraham and swore to him as bidden. Then the servant took 10 of his master's camels and set out, taking with him all the bounty of his master, and he made his way to Aram Naharaim, which is modern-day Syria. Naharaim is the rivers. So it's somewhere around the Tigris-Euphrates River area. It's the city of Nahor, the place where Abraham had lived, right? He made the camels kneel down by the well outside the city at evening time, the time when the women come out to draw water. So this is a thing that women did, drawing the water. And he said, O Lord, God of my master Abraham, grant me good fortune this day and deal graciously with my master Abraham. So he prays to God in Abraham's name. Here I stand by the spring as the daughters of the townsmen come out to draw the water. Let the maiden to whom I say, please lower your jar that I may drink, and who replies, drink, and I will also water your camels. Let her be the one whom you've decreed for your servant Isaac. Thereby shall I know that you have dealt graciously with my master. So he says to God, send me a sign, right? When a woman comes out and asks me to drink and then also says, oh, let me take care of your camels, then I'll know. And it says he had scarcely finished speaking when Rebekah, who was born to Bethuel, the son of Milcah, the wife of Abraham's brother Nahor, that's the place where they live, right? Nahor, came out with her jar on her shoulder. So this is Abraham's grandniece, if you will, right? Bethuel is Abraham's nephew, and this is his nephew's daughter. Another fancy way of saying Isaac's cousin. The maiden was very beautiful, a virgin whom no man had known. She went down to the spring, filled her jar, and came up. The servant ran toward her and said, please let me sip a little water from your jar. Drink, my lord, she said, and she quickly lowered her jar upon her hand and let him drink. When she had let him drink his fill, she said, I will also draw for your camels until they finish drinking. Wow. So now he knows. This is the woman. Quickly emptying her jar into the trough, She ran back to the water to draw, and she drew for all his camels. The man, meanwhile, stood gazing at her, silently wondering whether the Lord had made his errand successful or not, which seems pretty strange. You just asked for everything to happen exactly how it happened, and you're still not sure? What's going on with this guy? Everything he just asked for happened exactly the way he asked it, and he's wondering. When the camels had finished drinking, the man took a gold nose ring, and that's what it says, nose ring, weighing half a shekel, and 2 gold bands for her arms, and 10 shekels in weight. Pray tell me, he said, whose daughter are you? Is there room in your father's house for us to spend the night? She replied, I'm the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Milcah, whom she bore to Nahor. And she went on, there is plenty of straw and feed at home, and also room to spend the night. The man bowed low in homage to the Lord. And he said, blessed be the Lord, Baruch Adonai. It's almost Baruch Atah Adonai. It's almost one of the first blessings that we have in the Torah, right? Blessed be the Lord, the God of my master Avraham, Adoni Avraham, Asher Lo Azav, who has not withheld his steadfast faithfulness for my master. For I have been guided on my errand by the Lord to the house of my master's kinsman. So he tells her, this is it. I'm Abraham's person, and you're the kinsman of my master. The maiden ran and told all this to her mother's household, by the way. Notice that it says to her mother's household. It's interesting because it seems as though, again, maybe Bethuel had more than one wife. So maybe her mother, who's also Laban's mother, is a different mother than maybe the other wives of Bethuel, right? So it's possible. Now, Rebekah had a brother whose name was Laban. Laban ran out to the man at the spring. When he saw the nose ring and the bands on his sister's arms, and when he heard his sister Rebekah say, thus the man spoke to me, he went up to the man who was still standing beside the camels at the spring. Come in, O blessed of the Lord, he said. Why do you remain outside when I have made the house ready, the house and a place for the camels? So what do we notice about Laban right away? The Torah tells us, you see it? When he saw the nose ring and the bands on his sister's arms, what does he see?
Wealth.
Yeah, he sees dollar signs. This guy, we know right away what Laban's angle is because the Torah just told us. The Torah doesn't say that for no reason. It tells us that he's thinking about the money. And the interesting thing is, what does it tell us about their values? And what does it tell us about, again, what we have to worry about? We have some people who are we have some people who you got to be careful. So they seem okay though, right? Come in. So the man entered the house and the camels were unloaded. The camels were given straw and feed, and the water was brought to bathe his feet and the feet of the men with him. Well, what other men were with him, by the way? We didn't hear about that. But when food was set before him, he said, I will not eat until I have told my tale. And he said, speak then. So they bring him out food and he says, no, I'm not going to eat until I tell you why I'm here. And he starts, I'm Abraham's servant, he began. And notice, by the way, this chapter is a really long chapter. Now, we didn't put in the chapters and verses, so it's not long because Jews said, hey, let's make this a long chapter. But what the Christians noticed about this when they put in the verses and the chapter number, ordered it like this, and, again, broke it the way they did, is they said, it's really hard to break this story down. Like, where's the next chapter? Because it's pretty much, once he comes to town, this is what happens. And you'll see it's a really, really long chapter, by far the longest chapter in Genesis. So I'm Abraham's servant. And the Lord has greatly blessed my master, and he's become rich. Well, maybe he knows who he's talking to, right? He starts right away with, he's rich. He's given him sheep and cattle, silver and gold, male and female slaves, camels and asses. And Sarah, my master's wife, bore my master a son in her old age, and he has assigned to him everything he owns. So here he's saying, this guy's going to inherit a lot of money.
Right.
My master has a lot of money, and there's only one son, and he's got a lot of money. Now, what's interesting about this is he, number one, says he's the only son. Now, we know that Ishmael is another son. We know that Lot is a nephew. We know there's all these other people that, then there's this guy that seems like he could have inherited something. There's a lot of people who could have had claims on the money, but he says no. And not only that, he says that he had a son late in life. Now, Abraham, we know, is an old man when he has the kid. We know he's 99, right? He's an old guy. What's interesting is that the Torah actually tells us he has kids after this. These are not the end of Abraham's kids. Abraham has children after Sarah dies, another wife. So the Torah tells us that. But what's interesting about it is when the servant says it, there seems to be an implication that no one else is going to inherit anything except for this guy. So you have to get on this guy. My master's son, Isaac, he's going to get everything. It's not being split with anybody else, no other brothers. So this is what's so amazing about this, is that, like, he's a perfect catch. Now my master made me swear, saying, you shall not get a wife for my son and from the daughters of the Canaanites in whose land I dwell, but you shall go to my father's house, to my kindred, and get a wife for my son. And I said to my master, what if the woman does not follow me? Which is weird now, because why is he telling him everything? Well, I'm going to tell you something. He tells him everything. He tells Lavan and Bethuel everything. He tells him, like, literally everything in his head, which is weird, but it's what we have. He replied to me, the Lord, whose ways I followed, will send his angel with you and make your errand successful. And you will get a wife for my son, from my kindred, from my father's house. Thus you shall be freed from my adjuration. If when you come to my kindred, they refuse you, only then you shall be freed from my adjuration. So he tells them that if you don't do this, I'm free of this obligation. I'm done, which is interesting. I came today to the spring, and I said, O Lord, God of my master Abraham, if you would indeed grant success to the errand of which I am engaged, as I stand by the spring of water, let the young woman who comes out to draw, and to whom I say, please let me drink a little water from your jar, and who answers, you may drink, and I will also draw for your camels, let her be the wife whom the Lord has decreed for my master's son. I had scarcely finished praying in my heart when Rebekah came out with her jar on her shoulder and went down to the spring and drew. And I said to her, please give me a drink. She quickly lowered her jar and said, drink, and I will also water your camels. So I drank, and she also watered the camels. I inquired of her, whose daughter are you? And she said, the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Nahor, whom Milcah bore to him. And I put the ring on her nose and the bands on her arms. Then I bowed low in homage to the Lord and blessed the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who led me on the right way to get the daughter of my master's brother for his son. And now, and again, we're in verse 50 already, super long. And if you mean to treat my master with true kindness, now we get to the point, right? If not, tell me also that I may turn right or left. And then Laban and Bethuel answered, and it says both of them answered. Laban actually first is named. The brother and her dad answered. The matter was decreed by the Lord. We cannot speak to you good, bad, or good. So they say, well, we really can't say anything. God clearly did all this. What can we do? God clearly made this miracle. Here is Rebekah before you. Take her and go, and let her be your wife to your master's son, as the Lord has spoken. When Abraham's servant heard the words, he bowed low to the ground before the Lord. The servant brought out objects of gold, and here's payday, right? Payday, silver and gold and garments, and gave them to Rebekah, and he gave presents to her brother and mother. Weird, right? What's missing there, folks?
Father didn't get anything.
What happened to him?
Right.
If you think it's just a mistake, like a scribal error or something's missing. Then he and the men with him ate and drank, and they spent the night. When they arose the next morning, he said, "Give me leave to go to my master." But her brother and mother said, "Let the maiden remain with us 10 days, then you may go." And he said to them, "Do not delay me now that the Lord has made my errand successful. Give me my leave that I may go to your master." So there again, it's the brother and mother. It doesn't say anything about Bethuel. So they say, stay here a little bit longer, right? Stay here 10 days. And he says, no. I got to go. I got to get back. This errand was blessed, and we got to finish it up. Now, you know what the traditional answer is for what happens to Bethuel. Anybody know? Well, it's based on this. It's based on the fact that even though Bethuel is Abraham's nephew, he's not a good guy. He's a creep. He's a bad guy. Well, we know that Laban is a bad guy because he ends up tricking his nephew and son/son-in-law, right? Jacob. When Jacob comes there to work for his daughters, he tricks him, right? And he tricks him into marrying Leah first and then tricks him into working there longer. So we know Laban's a bad guy. And the rabbis say, well, Bethuel was even worse. These are greedy, bad people. So the rabbis wrote a midrash here, which is an interesting one, which is based on the fact that these are creepy people, to put it mildly. The midrash goes, and you may have heard this before, that Laban and Bethuel, when they see the riches in front of them, they say to themselves, what do we need to let our sister and daughter go? We'll just kill this guy and take his stuff. We don't need to give her. Here he came, kill him, and what bury the body. That's it. Like it never happened. So the midrash goes that they poison him. And where do we even get that? Because the servant says, I'm not going to eat or drink until, well, it doesn't say drink, but I'm not going to eat or get on with this until I tell you my story. So he hadn't eaten yet. So the midrash is that he didn't eat because he made this oath, but also because he didn't really trust these people. Well, remember, according to Abraham's prayer, this guy's got angelic help. So what do the angels do? The angels who are accompanying him protect him. So when the poison food or drink gets passed to Eliezer, the angel switches the food around. It's that old scene from Princess Bride where he switches the food and the guy ends up eating the poison. Bethuel ends up eating the poison that that the servant was supposed to eat, that Eliezer was supposed to eat, right? So Bethuel died. He's dead. So the rabbis write this midrash for a few reasons. One, why does he not eat right away? Number two, these are creepy people, and let's prove they're creepy people by telling us that. But there's another part of this, which is that maybe there was a reason why they said, why don't you stay here for a few days? Stay here for a shiva, and then you can go. So there's this idea that we don't read it, but the rabbis say maybe what happened was that Bethuel died that night. And that's why he's not mentioned, which is the biggest issue. Why we have this midrash at all. Why is Laban here and the mother and not and Milcah, right? And Laban, why are they here and not Bethuel? So that's one of the rabbinic traditions about what happened here. He got poisoned. So I don't know. The bottom line is Eliezer, the servant / he's not going to have any of it. But they say, Let's call the girl and ask for her reply. Well, that's nice, right? Let's ask her what she wants to do. Rebecca says, they called Rebecca and said to her, will you go with this man? And she said, I will. That's all she says. I will. I elech. It's one word in Hebrew. I'm going. So they sent off their sister Rebecca and her nurse, along with Abraham's servant and his men. And this is an important woman, as we're going to learn, that this nurse and the tradition of her going away at this moment was a very powerful tradition. And they blessed Rebecca and said to her, "Oh, sister, may you grow into thousands of myriads," which are like thousands of millions, actually. "May your offspring seize the gates of their foes." So even though they're creepy people, maybe, we don't know for sure they're creepy, seem to be a little creepy. The rabbis really think they're creepy, but they do something here very powerful. They bless her and they say, may you become very fruitful, a lot of descendants, and may your offspring become so powerful that no one can withstand them, right? May they seize the gates of their foes. No one will keep your descendants down. What's so powerful about that, folks, is that line, that blessing, which was not said by a Jewish person, close to a Jewish person, our cousins, Laban. That line, that's the line that for thousands of years we've traditionally said to the woman just before she walks out to her wedding. When we do the bedekin ceremony, where we put the veil on the woman and bedeck her, we put the final act of sending her off to get married. That's what we're traditionally supposed to say to the woman, that line. So it's weird that this line, again, becomes the line that we say to women when they get married in Judaism, traditionally. May you grow into thousands of myriads. Wow. Then Rebekah and her maids arose, mounted the camels, and followed the man. And the servant took Rebekah and went his way. Isaac had just come back from the vicinity of Be'er Lahai Roi. And this is this area, this well area of life vision, if you will. That's what Lahai Roi means, the vision of life. For he is settled in the region of Negev. He was living in the south. And Isaac went out walking in the field toward evening, and he looked up and he saw the camels approaching. Raising her eyes, Rebekah saw Isaac. She alighted from the camel and said to the servant, "Who is that man walking in the field toward us?" And the servant said, "That is my master." So she took her veil and she covered herself. So you can see the original bedekin. She covered herself with the veil. Now, some people say it's when we remove the veil for a woman before her marriage and we see that she's the right wife, the Jacob story. It's not. The bedekin is actually a recreation of this moment, of this marriage between Isaac and Rebekah, which was a beautiful moment. She covered herself with the veil. The servant told Isaac all the things that he had done. It's a very powerful moment. I mean, just think about this. Just think about him walking in the field towards evening. It's sunset. The camels are coming along the field. And she sees him. And she learns who this man is. And he hears who she is. And Isaac brought her into the tent of his mother, Sarah. And he took Rebekah as his wife. Isaac loved her and thus found comfort after his mother's death. It's one of the most beautiful lines in the Torah, I think. In my humble opinion, that's one of the most beautiful lines in the whole Torah. And it's the power of love and how love will turn even the hardest loss. And honestly, losing one's mother is truly one of the hardest losses that somebody could have. Now, I can say that, unfortunately, from personal experience, but it is truly one of the hardest things to have, to suffer. And here he is finding somebody who provides. Again, she's not a substitute, right? He's not looking for a substitute for his mother, but he finds comfort in love in this relationship. And it is truly, again, one of the most amazing things about love, how it doesn't take away the loss. It doesn't never makes up for the loss, but it helps us get through loss. It helps us, it helps soothe the pain of the loss, and to have a partner in life who can do that is the greatest blessing. And it's very hard. It's very hard to lose a parent without having somebody with you to help you with that. It would have been hard for me to imagine getting through the last couple of years without my wife when I lost my parents. So it is, to me, it's always been a very powerful line, and now even more so. It's hard for me to read that without tearing up. Forget tearing up. I'm teared up already without losing it. That idea of Sarah's tent, and Sarah's tent becoming Rebecca's tent too. It's stopped necessarily being Sarah's tent, but now Rebecca has come into his life, and he finds comfort. Vayenechem Yitzchak, after his mother's death. So they're definitely connected. The marriage and the loss are connected, right? And so Isaac can move on. So that's a very long chapter, as you can see, 67 verses, right? Super long. And actually as length of there's a longer chapter in Numbers, it's 83 verses, but as far as length of text and stuff, this is the longest chapter of narrative in the whole Bible. Longest chapter. So that's chapter 24. Now chapter 25 is also about life cycle and marriage and births, and actually will take us to the end of it'll take us to the end of this kind of story before we get into next week's parsha. But it's very interesting because it's almost, I don't want to say it's anticlimactic, but there's something weird that happens here. You'll see if I'm wrong about saying it's weird. And again, I don't use the word anticlimactic, but it's definitely kind of weird. So Isaac marries Rebecca and has comfort, right? Guess who else? Guess who also gets hooked up? Abraham. Abraham, you're 137 years old, and right. he's still looking to find love too, I guess. It says he took another wife whose name was Keturah. By the way, the rabbis don't like the idea that he found a whole nother wife, by the way. They felt uncomfortable with it. Keturah means crown. Keter means crown. Keturah is the feminine version of crown, tiara, if you will. They don't like the fact that this is a whole new lady. So the midrash is that this is none other than Hagar. Hagar comes back in his life, and he renames her the crown. I don't know. The rabbis don't like people disappearing, so they don't like the fact that Hagar doesn't. We don't know what's coming. We don't know what happens to her. They also don't like the fact that he goes out and finds a whole nother woman. A whole lot of reasons why they have this midrash, but it says he took another wife. Hagar was never his wife. But I guess the idea that Hagar ends up getting promoted makes him feel good. But here's what happens. She bore him Zimran, Yokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. And again, Midian is really the important one here because the Midianites are descendants of Abraham, which is important because Midianites are Jethro. Moses marries a Midianite. And we also know the Midianites become some of our enemies. But all these people seem to be tribes people that live in the Jordan or modern day Saudi Arabia on the other side of the Jordan from Israel. And it says Yokshan begot Sheba, right? Sheba is the queen of Sheba. And Dedan. The descendants of Dedan were the Ashurim, the Letushim, and the Leumim. And these again seem to be tribes people that are in somewhere in the Arabian Peninsula. Sheba seems to be either in Yemen or, of course, as some traditions hold, that it's in Ethiopia, but probably was in Yemen. But whatever it is, it's far away. The descendants of Midian were Epher, Enoch, Abida, and Eldaah. All these were the descendants of Keturah. So Keturah has quite a lot of children. However, Abraham willed all that he owned to Isaac. So even though he had all these other kids, Isaac still gets the inheritance. But to Abraham's sons by concubines, Abraham gave gifts while he was still living. And he sent them away from his son Isaac eastward to the land of the east. So he tells all these other people, here's your money, here's stuff for you, but don't stay here. This is Isaac's area. You can go over there. This is Isaac's area. They get money, but they don't get the stuff. So he decides how much these people are going to get, and he sends them away before he dies. It says the total span of Abraham's life was 175 years. So assumedly, again, he lives about 40 years after Sarah dies, 38 years. And it says Abraham breathed his last, dying at a good, ripe old age, right? Old and contented, and he was gathered to his kin. His sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah, in the field of Ephron, son of Zohar, facing Mamre, the field that Abraham bought from the Hittites. Right. Where Abraham was buried, and Sarah his wife. And if, by the way, if you wondered what happened to Ishmael before that, we don't know. But it says that Isaac and Ishmael came together to bury their father. So even though they live very different lives, and even though they have very different destinies, they do come together to bury Abraham. So that's a nice little reminder that the children of Isaac and the children of Ishmael can work together. Hopefully it's more than just to bury our dead. Common dead, right? After the death of Abraham, God blessed his son Isaac, and Isaac settled near Be'er Lahai Roi. This is the line of Ishmael, Abraham's son, whom Hagar the Egyptian, Sarah's son, bore to Abraham. And so now we have Ishmael's descendants. And guess what? He has 12 sons, 12 tribes of Ishmael. Yeah. So these technically are 12 tribes before we get to our 12 tribes. But again, they're not Abraham's primary descendants. They're not the ones who get his gifts. These are the names of the sons of Ishmael, by their names in the order of their birth. Nebaioth, firstborn of Ishmael, Kedar, Adbeel, Mibsam, Mishma, Duma, Masa, Hadad, Tema, Yatur, Naphish, and Kedma. These are the sons of Ishmael, and these are the names by their villages and by their encampments. 12 chieftains of as many tribes. These were the years of the life of Ishmael, 137 years, which is interesting because that's how old Abraham is when he starts this new chapter of his life, 137. Then he breathed his last and he died, and he was gathered to his kin. Doesn't say where he's buried, though. They dwelled from Havilah by Shur, which is close to Egypt, all the way to Ashur. They camped alongside all their kinsmen. And so that portion ends with the information about Ishmael and his family, and of course about Abraham and his other, we would say Abraham and his other descendants. So I don't know if I'd call it anticlimactic. I don't want to say that. But given what we've also already read in this week's portion, I wouldn't say it's the most critical information. I would say that if most people were quizzed on the 12 sons of Ishmael, you have to be pretty knowledgeable of Torah to know the 12 sons of Ishmael. I'd be very impressed. I just read them and I can't remember half of them. So if people can remember them, that's a pretty good skill. Kelly, you're on the call right now, right? Kelly, you're on the Zoom.
Yeah, I'm here. I
I
just
just want to
have
make
myself.
sure. I just want to make sure. Kelly worked on the trivia contest. I want to make sure the 12 sons of Ishmael are not on this trivia Sunday, because if they are, that's too hard.
They're not.
By the way, even asking people how old Ishmael is, 137, that could be a good bonus question of 137, but that's pretty hard. Even Abraham at 175 is tough. The questions are related to Judaism, though, right, Kelly?
All 30 of them definitely are. Yes.
So for those who have not signed up, that is my commercial for Trivia Night. Trivia Night on Sunday. So we still have room for you. We have a bunch of people that signed up, but we'd love to see you at Trivia Night, and it's 6 o'clock on Sunday. And we're going to have a great time. If you want to order food, you got to pretty much do it tomorrow. So if you want to just get the game, it's $36. You can, if you just want to play the game. And if you want, and the questions really, all joking aside, they're not that hard. Okay. I mean, they're not like I just joked with her about those questions. They're not that trivial.
They're from culture to they're across the board. Yeah.
Yes. So I was joking when I said I do not want to scare people away with anything close to the 12 sons of Ishmael. So so that is it's going to be a lot of fun though, and you can watch even if you don't want to play, but you got to register in order to get the Kahoot setup. So thanks everybody, and thank you Kelly for helping putting that together.
That was fun. It was good. Thank you.
It's going to be fun. I know some people are intimidated by it, but it's not. It's going to be fun. It's just for fun. It's fun, folks. And I'm not playing, right? I'm not playing. So it's not like you're playing, oh, the rabbi's going to get these. I'm not playing. I'm not eligible. So you do not have to, and I'm not going to be anyone's lifeline either. There's no lifelines. You're on your own, but it's not hard. It's fun. Anyways, join us for that. I want to finish up because I don't say I rushed through that because we talked about a lot of important things. I did rush through chapter 25 because quite frankly, you gotta dig deep to get a good Devar Torah out of the 12 sons of Ishmael. I'm sure, again, there's somebody who's done something on that, but I've never seen it. And most people don't really go there. But I do think there is something powerful in that last chapter, which is that Ishmael and Isaac come together and do bury their father. You could say maybe it would be nice if they saw each other again. We don't know that they did. Maybe they did. Maybe they had Thanksgiving together occasionally. I don't know. Not Thanksgiving, but whatever their ancient version of that is. We don't know. It does say that they lived in different areas and they don't hang out together. Usually they're in different parts of the Middle East, but it is nice to think that.
Rabbi, that's typical of what families do many times.
It is typical, but let's hope, folks. And again, I'm not going to talk about politics, not going to get into politics right now, but let's hope that these agreements that were recently signed between Jews and Arabs, between Israel and these Arab countries, let's hope that that's the beginning of many more agreements and peace treaties with the sons of Ishmael. They called this these were agreements of the Abraham covenant. That's what they called it. There's a reason why we called them those. Why Christians who helped organize it and the Jews and the Arabs, the Muslims who signed this all together as the children of Abraham, why we referred to it. And let's hope this year, as we read this portion, because we're in a different place than we were last year when we read it, we have signed agreements with the descendants of Ishmael, who, quite frankly, control a lot of money, folks, whether we like it or not. And I'm not going to give away any secrets in that it would be better if they didn't have access to these funds, but they do. And it's great that now they'll be working with Israel and not officially boycotting Israel, even though they did some business with Israel secretly. Now it'll be out in the open. It will be very out in the open. And by the way, It's very good for them. It's very good for Israel. And one of the things that Israel did right away, some of you might have seen, Hadassah Hospital is going to be building a facility in the Emirates, and we're bringing Jewish medical ingenuity and Jewish medical care to save people's lives in these countries.
Wow.
And so from the last 30, 40 years, secretly, some of these people have been flying to Israel to get treated by Israel, right? Saeb Erekat, who just died of COVID, who was the lead Palestinian negotiator, he was treated, by the way, were trying to keep him alive in Israeli hospitals. Palestinians, by the way, were not happy about that. But the reality is that's where he went for medical care. He didn't go to other Arab countries. He didn't go to Europe. He went to Israel to be treated. Again, he passed away this week, but the reality is if this guy can be treated, and now people in Arab countries can be treated by Jewish doctors and by Israeli doctors, Israeli medical teams, these people are going to be kept alive, are literally going to be grateful for their lives to the Jewish people and to Israel. So that is my little new thing for this year, which we couldn't have said last year. So let's hope even more so next year, that next year and in the years to come, that we'll have even more agreements with these countries. And people who minimize the agreements and who say, well, so what? Israel never fought a war with the United Arab Emirates or didn't fight a war with Bahrain. You're missing the point, because those countries finance those wars against Israel and finance those terrorist attacks against Israel. And so cutting those funds off is a wonderful thing and is an accomplishment and is a good thing to celebrate. So don't anybody minimize it by saying, well, we never fought a war with the United Arab Emirates. It doesn't matter. And if you don't believe me, look at what the Palestinians said with this, which was that they lamented the fact that these countries signed agreements with Israel. They condemned the United Arab Emirates. They condemned Bahrain for signing these agreements. So if you don't believe me, listen to the Palestinians who said these were horrible things. Then you know that they were not horrible things. When our enemies tell us that these are horrible things, chances are they're really even better than you and I can understand. So let's be grateful for those things and for more to come. Let's hope. So I do want to finish with tonight with a text from Rabbi Sachs of blessed memory, and it's terrible again that we have to say Zichrono Livracha, that he should be remembered for blessing, because he should be he should have been out here teaching us at least once before he passed, and it's a terrible loss. So, and it's very powerful. It's very powerful what he wrote that we're sharing this week in particular, for a lot of reasons, and most importantly because he just passed. So he writes, a while back, a British newspaper, The Times, interviewed a prominent member of the Jewish community and a member of the House of Lords. Let's call him Lord X, on his 92nd birthday. The interviewer said, most people, when they reach their 92nd birthday, start thinking about slowing down. You seem to be speeding up. Why is that? Lord X's reply was this: when you get to 92, you see the door starting to close. And I have so much to do before the door closes that the older I get, the harder I have to work. So if that's all we read this week, that's amazing. Now, he didn't write that. He's quoting it, but I hadn't heard that before. It's a really, really powerful line. And again, it's something that makes me think about the fact that he only passed it. He was only 72 when he passed. He's 20 years of not being able to do that. And of course, he's thinking about that for himself. Think about that again for somebody who's in their 90s, and God willing, again, Joyce, you just celebrated your birthday, 2 weeks ago? Not even 2 weeks ago, right? 2 weeks ago? Joyce?
My birthday,
Yeah.
September 26th.
2 months ago. Wait, what? It was 2 months ago?
Yeah, it went fast. We just celebrated my
I
anniversary.
saw you right after that. And then it's Lee's birthday next month in December.
Yes,
Yeah.
December.
You think about when you reach your 90s, everybody should have as much energy as you, Joyce. So
Thank you.
Amen. Amen.
we don't talk about, Joyce never focuses on her age. She doesn't like me even saying that. But I will tell you that watching her fold up her legs and sitting cross-legged, which I couldn't do that right now. I can't do it right now. I can't do that. And I even stretched today. I can't sit cross-legged. Anyways,
Yeah, I can do it.
she's I saw her do it 2 weeks ago, or a week and a half ago, folks. So trust me. So again,
Me too.
there's this feeling that
I saw her do it.
yeah, it's amazing. When we at some point, when we think about our lives, we think about the fact that we have work to do, and none of us know how long we get. But when you get to 92, you start to say, hey, I know I got to get this stuff done. We get a similar impression of Abraham in this week's Parsha. Sarah, his constant companion throughout their journeys, has died. He's 137 years old. We see him mourn Sarah's death, and then he moves into action. He engages in an elaborate negotiation to buy a plot of land in which to bury her. As the narrative makes clear, this is not a simple task. He confesses to the local people, the Hittites, that he is an immigrant and a resident among you, meaning that he knows he has no right to buy land. It will take a special concession on their part for him to do so. The Hittites politely but firmly try to discourage him. He has no need to buy a burial plot. No one among us will deny you his burial site to bury your dead. He can bury Sarah in someone else's graveyard. Equally politely, but no less insistently, Abraham makes it clear that he is determined to buy a land. So he doesn't want to just borrow it. He doesn't want to say, well, I just used it. He wants to own it. He paid, and here he says, he pays a highly inflated price, 400 shekels, to do so. The purchase of the cave of Machpelah is evidently a highly significant event because it is recorded here in great detail and highly legal terminology. Not just here, but 3 times subsequently. Here in 23:17 and subsequently in 25:9, 49:30, and 50:13, which are all times when the other patriarchs but die. Each time with the same formality. Here, for instance, is Jacob on his deathbed speaking to his sons. So again, this is at the end of the book of Genesis, 49, right? Bury me with my fathers in the field of Ephron the Hittite, the cave in the field of Machpelah near Mamre and Canaan, which Abraham bought along with the field as a burial place with Ephron from Ephron the Hittite. There Abraham and his wife Sarah were buried. There Isaac and his wife Rebekah were buried. And there I buried Leah. The field and the cave in it were bought from the Hittites. We own it, folks. Kids, we own it. We paid for it. Our family's buried there, and I want to be buried there. Something significant is being hinted at here. Otherwise, why specify each time exactly where the field is and who Abraham bought it from? Immediately after the story of the land purchase, we read, Abraham was old, well advanced in years, and God had blessed Abraham with everything. Again, this sounds like the end of a life, not a preface to a new course of action. And again, our expectation is confounded. Abraham launches into a new initiative, this time to find a suitable wife for his son Isaac, who at this point is at least 37 years old, which, by the way, we didn't point out. If Abraham is 100 years old when he's born, he's 137 now. It means that Isaac's 37. Abraham, and again, maybe he's older because it doesn't say how much long after the burial he goes out and says, go get a wife for my son, right? It could have been a year later, 2 years later. Doesn't say. Abraham instructs his most trusted servant to go to my native land, to my birthplace, to find the appropriate woman. He wants Isaac to have a wife who will share his faith and his way of life. Abraham does not stipulate that she should come from his own family, but this seems to be an assumption hovering in the background. To put it mildly, right? Go there and get it from my birthplace. As with the purchase of the field, the course of events is described in more detail than almost anywhere else in the Torah. Every conversational exchange is recorded. We saw that. You just read that. The contrast with the story of the binding of Isaac could not be greater. There, almost everything, Abraham's thoughts, Isaac's feelings, is left unsaid. Here, everything is said. Again, the literary style calls our attention to the significance of what is happening without telling us precisely what it is. So that whole repetition where the slave, the servant, Eliezer, says everything that just happened again, it goes on and on. The Akedah, the binding of Isaac, we need to know more. Chapter 22, just 3 chapters earlier. We don't know what's going on. 2 chapters earlier. Forget 3 chapters. It's actually 2 chapters earlier. The explanation is simple and unexpected. Throughout the story of Avraham and Sarah, God promises them 2 things, children and a land. The promise of the land, rise, walk in the land throughout its length and breadth, for I will give it to you, is repeated no less than 7 times. The promise of children occurs 4 times. Abraham's descendants will be a great nation, chapter 12, as many as the dust of the earth, chapter 13. We've just read these. The stars in the sky, chapter 15, and he will be the father, not of one nation, but of many nations, chapter 17. We've read all of these in the last 3 weeks. 4 times he's told he's going to have a lot of kids. Despite this, when Sarah dies, Abraham has not a single inch of land that he can call his own, and he's only got 1 child who will continue the covenant, Isaac, who is currently, at that point, unmarried. Neither promise has been fulfilled. Hence the extraordinary detail of the 2 main stories in Chaye Sarah, the purchase of the land and the finding of a wife for Isaac. There's a moral here. And the Torah slows down the speed of the narrative as it speeds up the action, so that we will not miss the point. God promises, but we have to act. God promised Abraham the land, but he had to buy the field first. God promised Abraham many descendants, but Abraham had to ensure that his son was married and to a woman who would share the life of the covenant, so that Abraham would have, as we say today, Jewish grandchildren. So what's so powerful about that? And again, he says it in a slightly humorous way, but he says something which is really, really so powerful here. We can have God tell us, God give us a promise, but the promise doesn't mean that we don't do anything. Even if we feel like God's given us a possibility, a descendant, destiny, opportunities, things that we can have within our grasp, we still have to grasp it. Within our grasp is not the same as holding it. We've got to do something. We've got to grasp it. We've got to use our hand, our energy to do it. It's a really powerful idea. Being told you can have it isn't the same as having it. And that requires us to do something. Despite all the promises, God does not and will not do it alone. By the very act of self-limitation, what we call in Hebrew, tzimtzum, through which he creates the space for human freedom, God gives us responsibility, and only by exercising it do we reach our full stature as human beings. God saved Noah from the flood, but Noah had to make the ark. He gave the land of Israel to the people of Israel, but they had to fight the battles. God gives us the strength to act, but we have to do the deed. What changes the world, what fulfills our destiny, is not what God does for us, but what we do for God. Folks, that is pretty powerful stuff.
It really is.
That is some pretty powerful stuff. That's why this loss is so great, because those kinds of ideas that he reminds us of in the Torah, so important. It's so important for people to hear, of any religion. Everybody who reads the Bible needs to be reminded that all these things that happen in the Bible, even these like great miracles and acts of God, Noah had to build the ark. God didn't give Noah an ark to get into. Noah had to build it. Noah had to do some of the work himself. This is what leaders understand, and it is what made Abraham the first Jewish leader. Leaders take responsibility for creating the conditions through which God's purpose can be fulfilled. They're not passive, but active. Even in old age, like Abraham in this week's Parsha. Indeed, in the chapter immediately following the story of finding a wife for Isaac, to our surprise, we read that Abraham remarries and has 8 more children. Whatever else this tells us, and there are many interpretations, the most likely being that it explains how Abraham became the father of many nations, it certainly conveys the point that Abraham stayed young the way Moses stayed young. His eyes were undimmed and his natural energy unabated. That's a nice way of saying he was still vibrant, which is a nice way of saying something else that I'm not going to say. So through action, though action takes energy, it gives us energy. Though action takes energy, it gives us energy. That's amazing. The contrast between Noah in old age and Abraham in old age could not be greater. Perhaps, though, the most important point of the Parsha is that large promises, a land, countless children, become real through small beginnings. Leaders begin with an envisioned future, but they also know that there's a long journey between here and there. We can only reach it one act at a time, one day at a time. There is no miraculous shortcut. And if there were, it would not help. The use of a shortcut would culminate in an achievement like Jonah's gourd, which grew overnight and then died overnight. Abraham acquired only a single field and had just one son who would continue the covenant. Yet he did not complain, and he died serene and satisfied because he had begun, because he had left future generations something on which to build. All great change is the work of more than one generation. And none of us will live to see the full fruit of our endeavors. Leaders see the destination, begin the journey, and leave behind them those who will continue it. That is enough to endow a life with immortality. So, if you come to realize that this was the Devar Torah that he delivered for the last week, for the week that he would be remembered, the week of his Shiva. So that is a very powerful way to remind us of what we do in this life and the legacy that we leave behind. We don't have to do all the work ourselves. And, leaders have to do some of the work. They have to establish a foundation, but they don't have to do everything. They can't do everything. The next generation has to come and continue and build on that. And by the way, that's one of the reasons why Moses, we teach, couldn't lead the people into the land of Israel, because he couldn't do everything. There needed to be some almost forced way to make sure another generation could continue that work, to lead the people, and then another person to lead them into Israel, Joshua. So it's tough to think about what doesn't get done, but we can't do it all ourselves, and we should all live a life like Rabbi Sachs of blessed memory, who did a lot of the work, but who leaves it for future generations to continue to build. So, folks, I hope we had a chance to study this and to be inspired by the words of Rabbi Sachs, and again to think about the legacies that we'd like to leave behind. Not to be, and it's not a depressing thing to think about what is our legacy, to make sure that we're working on our ethical will and make sure that if people don't know, we need to write it down so people know what it is we'd like to see continue to get done, and to think about what's really important, because it's not, it's not the material and physical things in this world that people will remember us by. They'll remember us by our words of Torah. They'll remember us by our ways that we touched their lives and made them feel. And this is the most important thing, is to leave behind a legacy of love and of making a difference. So I want to show you again where this comes from. I'm going to forward everybody the link for Rabbi Sachs's website. A lot of you you can get these emailed to you every week, right? If you some people do. I think,
I get it.
you guys do, and
Yes, we do.
a bunch of people do. Look, I don't know how long these are going to go on for. I don't know if they're going to go through the old other ones and recycle them or whatever. I mean, the sad thing is that we won't get new ones, right? But there's so much there, and so when we look at the covenant and conversation. Oh, sorry. If we go to, for example, if you go search by Parsha, when we go to Chaye Sarah, you can see there's this year's beginning the journey. Then there's last year's to have a why, and there's a family version of it, which is kind of like a one that you could share with kids. I mean, it's a slimmed down version. Oh no, there's the Spanish version's up now. There's one on the family. Well, that's the family edition. Again, that's the family edition. But here's on Judaism and Islam, the world's oldest man, a journey of 1,000 miles, faith in the future. You can see there's it goes back to 57, 75, 7. Here's the other ones on Judaism and Islam. You see, he had that one before, in 57, 69, and then it's there again here. So sometimes, like, you're not going to say, oh, how did he write 20 different Divrei Torah? Some of them, like I said, are kind of recycled, but there's so much. I mean, there's 3 or 4 really powerful Divrei Torah on each Torah portion. And so again, you can see it by Parsha. You can see all the Torah portions, and you can see, you can click on any of them. There's one there. There's, I don't know, just shlach. You've got these on every, on every one of these. You have them. So there's enough to keep us, studying him, and we studied through his Divrei Torah the last 3 years. We studied so many of Divrei Torah on our Wednesday nights. To give you an idea of how many we did, I'm going to show you. I can actually show you because right now I can share my computer. We read it's in the couple, it's in the 50 or 60s of how many times we looked at Rabbi Sachs's Divrei Torah. I mean, it's amazing. And occasionally I would quote him on the high holidays occasionally, but yeah. Anyways, he wrote some beautiful pieces about the United States too. He really did find the best of our country, and wrote about America in a way that very few Americans have written as powerfully about our country. So,
Rabbi?
Yeah.
I have a question. Rabbi Sachs was the chief rabbi of Britain.
Yeah.
Well, why do they have a chief rabbi in Britain? But we don't have one in the United States,
No,
right?
we've never done that. We tried, actually. We tried about 100 years ago, and I think it lasted for about a year. The interesting thing about Rabbi Sachs about that position. So the current rabbi is a guy by the name of Ephraim Mervis, who took over a few years ago. I've seen him speak a couple of times. He actually spoke at APAC last year. Not last year. That was this year, folks. It feels like last year. It was February or March. He came, the current chief rabbi. It was really great because he came right after Corbyn had been defeated. I think Corbyn had been defeated like a month before, and he spoke about what's going on in Britain right now. Here's Ephraim Mervis, and Corbyn. Some of the articles, and I shared one with you, Philip. Some of the chief rabbis have really avoided speaking about politics, and he really did too. But when Corbyn was in power, was head of labor, was in power, he's been thrown out. Actually, he's basically been thrown out of the Labor Party. But at the time, he led the Labor Party, and Sachs came out and finally had to say, this guy's an anti-Semite. And it was really tough because there are Jews that are a member of the Labor Party. In England, the Labor Party is less Jewish than the Democrat. I mean, it's not exactly equivalent, right? The Labor Party is not the Democratic Party in America. In many ways, they're the left there, the conservative party there would be Democrats here. So many of them. And so, it just got so bad that Sachs finally had to speak out. So they generally stay out of politics. Their job is essentially to represent the Jewish community at things like the royal weddings and the birthday parties and stuff. He was very close with Prince Charles. They were the same age. And so he went to Charles's 70th birthday a couple of years ago, which people got mad at because I think it was on Shabbos, but he walked and whatever. I mean, he didn't care, but I mean, maybe he did, but some people in the Orthodox world didn't like him because they called him, if you saw that, they called him the rabbi to the Gentiles, the chief rabbi to the Gentiles, which was a knock on his closeness to the Gentile world and his ability to really connect with a Christian and non-Jewish world, because he really spoke to them. And he was really well loved by the general public in Britain. So he was the chief rabbi during a time in Britain where religion has gone very much, has become very marginalized. And of course, in Britain, we have a horrible situation where religion's oftentimes associated with Islamic, the Islamic radical Muslims, whatever you want to call it, in Britain, who are very powerful and there are more people today going to mosques regularly than church in England, numerically. It's a fact. Oh. And so it's a tough thing for the Jewish community to deal with, because obviously a lot of anti-Semitism does emanate from that. And so he was chief rabbi during that period. And he was also chief rabbi during the time when we moved to the internet and to the challenges and the opportunities that gave. He was very, very sophisticated in his use of the media, as you can see, and the internet, which is why we can see all his Divrei Torah. Got his stuff up there, and he was at a very good place. He has a wonderful TED Talk, by the way. I'm gonna put a link to the TED Talk because that's something everybody should see. We're talking about it yesterday morning. Judith Stolnitz was talking about how wonderful his TED Talk was. But he was great at doing that, and so that's part of what he did as well. The thing that he didn't do really well while he was chief rabbi was he didn't navigate the tensions between the Orthodox and the non-Orthodox world very well, because he tried and he did a little bit, but he didn't do it effectively for anybody, and everybody on the Orthodox weren't happy and the liberal groups were not happy. So it caused him a lot of anguish that he couldn't fix that. But once he wasn't chief rabbi anymore, he didn't have to do that. And so he could just be well loved by everybody. And so he retired when he was still in his 60s, and he was able to still be very effective and write and speak. And so I think he was more effective when he wasn't chief rabbi, actually. I was there when he was named chief rabbi, or right around I wasn't there right when he was named, but I was there that's when I've been to England the most, was when he was named chief rabbi, and he was young when he was named chief rabbi, um, and people were interested by his background because he was not from a long rabbinic line. He didn't have that. The other chief rabbis usually were descendants of rabbis, and he wasn't. And so he was raised in not a secular home, but definitely not a ultra Orthodox home. So the previous chief rabbi, Rabbi Jacobovitz or Lord Jacobovitz, Dr. Jacobovitz, was a specialist on medical ethics. And he was really well known because he wrote about Jewish medical ethics. And he was very important, even in America, for his understanding of bioethics. And especially in the 70s and 80s, that became very important. So that was kind of his field. But every chief rabbis kind of had their thing that they did. Rabbi Hertz, who did the Hertz commentary of the Torah, that Torah commentary, that English commentary still graces many conservative and Orthodox synagogues in America. It's been replaced in the last maybe decade or so, but for 50, 60 years, the Hertz commentary, if you came into a synagogue for a Shabbos, they handed you the Hertz commentary. That was the previous chief, not the previous before Jacobovitz, but about 70 years ago, he was the chief rabbi of Britain. So they've had a very important role to play. When Hertz was the chief rabbi, he was the chief rabbi not only of the United Kingdom, but he was the chief rabbi of India, the chief rabbi of Canada, folks. Canada was part of the British Empire. So the chief rabbi of United Kingdom was also the chief rabbi of Canada. So it was a huge, at one point when the British Empire was huge, chief rabbi of Hong Kong. He had literally a whole empire to minister to. But the rabbis today, the chief rabbi's office today is shrunk as far as the geography, and also as far as, to some extent, the responsibilities of the politics of it, to some extent. But when we tried it in America, it never launched. The chief rabbi doesn't speak in England. He doesn't speak for the reform movements, liberal movements in England. So he doesn't speak for those communities, which are much smaller numerically than they are in America. They're in the minority in England, but the chief rabbi doesn't technically speak for them. And that's one of the reasons why we could never really have a chief rabbi here. My dad used to joke that I was the chief rabbi of Santa Clarita, but I've never been. It's never been recognized, and I have no aspirations to be the chief rabbi even of Santa Clarita. But I will tell you that we couldn't have that in America because, again, our synagogues are so independent from each other, and from even within a movement, they're independent from each other. So it'll never happen here. It's okay. We don't need to have a chief rabbi. And quite frankly, we don't have there's no equivalent, even if you think about it, in the Christian world. In England, they have the Archbishop of Canterbury, who is the head of the Anglican Church, who, by the way, the chief rabbi, Rabbi Sachs, was more popular than for much of his time than the Archbishop of Canterbury. I think in many ways he was more respected than the archbishops of Canterbury. So they were looking in England or in Britain for an equivalent person to represent the Jewish community. And remember, other countries have chief rabbis too. So South Africa has a chief rabbi. France has a chief rabbi, bless you. And of course, Israel has a chief rabbi. Actually, Israel has two chief rabbis, a rabbi for the Ashkenazi community and the Sephardi community. So Israel has two recognized chief rabbis. So it's oftentimes a very political thing in Israel. And it also is in other countries. You could be the chief rabbi in some of these countries, and your synagogue, we have synagogues in America that are as large as some of these chief rabbis. I met the chief rabbi of Turkey about 30 years ago, 28 years ago. I met the chief rabbi of Turkey. Well, there's, 20,000 Jews left in Turkey today. So his job is not nearly as important as the chief rabbi of Turkey 400 years ago, where the Ottoman Empire was enormous. that job probably was one of the most powerful jobs in the Jewish world. Today, the chief rabbi of Turkey is probably has less responsibility than the rabbis at Stephen S. Wise. But it is an interesting thing to think about, the role of what a chief rabbi would do, and why you even have a chief rabbi, which is that you had countries where because there was no separation of church and state, you needed an ecclesiastical authority that you could go to and say, well, we want to tell the Jews that from now on they have to do X, Y, and Z, right? Go tell them that. So it's pretty wild. And it is wild, by the way, when you go to England and hear the prayer for the royal family during services. I cannot stop myself from chuckling when I hear the prayer for the royal family. Because again, we have a prayer for our country, which is great because it doesn't talk about any one individual. It talks about the leaders of our country, and it talks about the people who are serving in our country as police officers or in the military. But it doesn't talk about any one person in particular, and it doesn't talk about the royal family. You know, when you're in England and they pray for the royal family and somebody just got in some kind of weird scandal, you can't help but laugh when you hear that kind of stuff. It's definitely reminds you of the Jewish world outside of the United States, where again, thank God we don't have those same institutions to embarrass us. We have enough embarrassment in our world without having a royal family to embarrass us. So folks, I hope on that note that we can remember the legacy of Rabbi Sachs of blessed memory. And again, please join us for the trivia night, and join us for Shabbos this Friday, where we have a chance to say a prayer for our veterans, and also to remember those of blessed memory who passed at this time of year. So everybody stay strong and stay healthy, and stay positive. Though I'm now telling people not that kind of positive. Stay positive.
Yeah.
Emotionally and spiritually, and again, stay good. Stay good, everybody. That's another thing. We can say stay good. All right, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you for
Rabbi.
the inspiration.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Be well.